The church bell never rang that night, but every soul in town heard the vow just the same. A rancher named Eli Boone stood in front of a black girl he'd met only 3 days earlier. No ring, no flowers, no family on either side. Just a lantern swinging in the wind, a preacher with shaky hands, and half a dozen men outside muttering that this was a sin worth killing for. She looked him dead in the eye when the words were spoken, not trembling, not begging, steady as stone. By dawn, she'd done something no one expected, turned that rushed, ringless marriage into the fortune that saved his land and carved both their names into the county's history. What she did to make him rich, that's the part folks still argue about. Now you might be wondering, how in God's name does a rancher end up here? A wedding without a ring, a bride the town refused to claim, and whispers sharp enough to cut a man down before the vows were even finished. To understand it, you've got to ride back 3 days, back to Eli Boone's ranch, where the dust was thicker than the cattle and the only sound most mornings was the creak of a gate that hadn't been oiled in years. Eli wasn't an old man, but life had put 20 extra years on his back. He'd buried a wife young, lost a child in the fever, and now found himself fighting a losing war against debt and drought. Folks in town said Boone Ranch was cursed ground. The wells ran shallow, the fences sagged, and the cattle were too thin to fetch a fair price. Most mornings Eli sat on the porch with a tin cup of coffee, staring out at land that should have made him a king, but instead was turning him into a beggar. It was on one of those dry evenings that she came. A knock at the door, not timid, not polite, sharp, like someone who had no time left to waste. Eli opened it expecting a neighbor, maybe a boy selling eggs, but instead there she stood, tall, dark-skinned, hair tied back neat, and eyes like flint. She wasn't dressed for travel, no saddlebag, no wagon behind her, just a plain dress and boots worn through at the heels. Even, Eli said, voice rough from disuse. She didn't return the greeting, just looked past him into the house and asked, "You the owner here?" "I am," Eli said, "for now anyhow." "Good," she answered. "Then you'll do." That was the first moment Eli realized he wasn't the one holding the reins in this meeting. She stepped inside before he invited her, set her small satchel on the table, and spoke plain as daylight. "I need a husband, tonight." Eli nearly choked on the word. "A husband, miss, I don't." She cut him off with a hand, sharp as a whip. "Not love, not forever, just the word. Papers signed, a vow spoken in front of God and a preacher." Eli leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "And why in blazes would I agree to that?" She met his gaze steady. "Because if you don't, Boone Ranch won't see another harvest." It stung, hearing a stranger put words to the truth he'd been dodging. Boone Ranch was hanging by a thread, and Eli knew it. The bank was circling like a vulture waiting for the first sign of death. Without fresh money or some kind of miracle, he'd be driven off his land within the month. So he laughed, hard and bitter. "Lady, unless you've got a chest of gold in that satchel, I don't see how tying myself to you fixes a damn thing." She smiled then, not kindly, but like someone holding a card you hadn't seen yet. "Maybe not gold, but something worth more. If you've got the grit to stand beside me at that altar, you'll wake richer than you've ever been." Eli studied her for a long moment. "Out here you learned quick who was bluffing, and who wasn't, and this woman. She wasn't bluffing. By the time night fell, word had spread. Folks in town whispered about the rancher who'd gone crazy, taking in a black girl no one knew, agreeing to marry her without a ring, without a name, without a reason. The preacher had tried to refuse, stammering about God's law and man's order, but one hard look from Eli shut him up. The vows were spoken under a swaying lantern, just as you heard at the start. Eli's hands were rough and calloused. Hers was steady, strong, unshaken. When it came time to seal the words, there was no kiss, just silence, heavy as the night. And outside, 6 men waited, muttering about the kind of sin that should be stopped with blood. Now here's where I'll leave you hanging, because what happened after that midnight vow is the part that changes everything. The girl who walked into Eli's house a stranger was about to prove she wasn't empty-handed. She carried something more valuable than gold, more powerful than land, and by the first light of dawn, she'd make Eli Boone a rich man. But what she gave him, and how it nearly cost them both their lives, That's a story for the vows were barely spoken when Eli heard boots scuff against the church porch. Shadows moved behind the windows, 6 men who hadn't come to witness, only to they didn't carry Bibles and they damn sure weren't there to sing hymns. Their hands rested easy on pistols, their voices low and mean. Man's lost his senses, one muttered, or sold his soul, another spat. Eli felt the weight of every step. The preacher had gone pale, sweat dripping down his temples, but the girl, she stood steady, chin high, eyes locked on Eli like none of it mattered. When the vows were finished, she didn't reach for him, she didn't even look his way. Instead, she stepped forward, pushed open the church door and faced those men head on. "You've had your fun," the biggest of them sneered, spitting tobacco in the dirt, "but come sunrise you best undo this sham. A Boone don't marry the likes of you. Not here, not in this count." Her eyes narrowed. A vow spoken before God can't be undone by men. The words cut sharp as a knife. For a moment silence, then laughter, ugly and raw, rolled across the churchyard. Eli's hand drifted toward his holster, but she raised a hand without looking back, stopping him cold. "Not yet," she whispered. "They'll get their answer soon enough." Eli didn't understand then, but he would. They rode home in silence, lantern light bobbing between them. Eli wanted answers, but every time he opened his mouth her stare shut him up. By the time they reached the ranch, dawn was pressing at the horizon. She stepped down from the horse, dusted her dress, and finally spoke. "You'll need coffee," she said, walking inside like she owned the place. "What comes next requires a clear head." Eli followed, jaw tight. "Lady, I don't know who you are or what game you're playing, but if I wake tomorrow to find myself the laughingstock of this county, I'll—" She cut him off again. "You'll thank me by morning. Sit." And for reasons he couldn't explain, Eli, she untied the small satchel she'd carried since the night she appeared. For the first time Eli noticed how carefully she handled it. Not like clothing or food, but something alive, something dangerous. She set it on the table, fingers lingering on the worn leather strap. "You think I came here empty-handed," she said, "but this little bag carries more than your whole ranch is worth." Eli leaned forward. "Gold." She met his eyes, and for the first time he felt the weight of her presence. Not just a woman desperate for a husband, but someone who had walked through fire and lived to tell about it. "What's in this bag?" she said slowly. "Can turn men into allies or corpses. Which one you'll need? That depends on how the night ends." Eli pressed her for the truth, but she only gave pieces, never the whole. A name muttered under her breath. A name that made her flinch. A story about men who'd ridden hard after her, calling her property, swearing she carried something that belonged to them. "Who are they?" Eli demanded. "The kind who don't forgive," she answered. "And they'll be here before long." Eli's gut tightened. Suddenly the 6 men outside the church weren't just town gossips. They were vultures circling, waiting for her past to catch up. And if he stood beside her now, it meant that past was coming for him too. She poured coffee like it was an ordinary morning, set the steaming cup in front of him, and sat across the table. "You're wondering why I chose you," she said. Eli didn't deny it. "Because you're desperate," she said, plain as day. "A man with nothing left to lose will risk everything, and you've already lost more than most men ever will." Her words stung, because they were true. Eli had no wife, no heirs, no fortune, just land slipping through his fingers, and nights too long to sleep. "So what now?" he asked. "Now," she said, "we wait for dawn. And then I show you how a vow without a ring can buy you more than money ever could." Eli tried to rest, but every creak of the house set his nerves on edge. He heard her pacing in the next room, heard the faint scrape of metal, a knife being sharpened. The satchel never left her side. Outside, coyotes yipped. A horse whinnied in the distance, and once, just once, Eli swore he heard boots in the dirt road leading to the ranch. By midnight, he wasn't sure if he was more afraid of the men who hunted her, or of her herself. When the first gray light touched the windows, she was already dressed, standing tall, satchel in hand. "Come," she said. "It's time." "Time for what?" "Eli, for you to see what you married." And with that, she walked out the door, heading not toward town, but toward the barren stretch of land behind the Boone Ranch. The place Eli had always called worthless, the place he'd once thought about selling for scrap, just to keep food on the table. She stopped there, at the dry earth where nothing grew, and set the satchel down. Eli's heart pounded as she knelt, unstrapped it and drew out what lay inside. The sun broke over the horizon just as she held it up, and for a moment, Eli forgot how to breathe. It wasn't gold, it wasn't silver, it was something stranger, heavier and far more dangerous. Something that could turn Boone Ranch into fortune, or into a graveyard. And whatever it was, men were willing to kill for it. The sun broke over the barren ridge, casting long shadows across Boone Ranch. The girl knelt on the dry earth, her hands steady as she unbuckled the straps of that satchel. Eli stood behind her, boots sunk in dust, breath caught somewhere between hope and dread. When she drew it out, his first thought was that it was stone. A dull, heavy chunk, no bigger than a man's fist. But when the light hit it, the earth around them seemed to glow. Flecks of silver shimmered beneath the rough surface, veins of ore that caught fire in the dawn. Eli blinked. What in God's name? Silver, she said simply. Pure, richer than any mine for 50 miles. For a long moment, Eli couldn't speak. His ranch, the cursed, barren ground behind his fences, wasn't worthless after all. It was sitting on a treasure he'd never seen, never guessed. His voice came out low, almost hoarse. How did you know? She turned, eyes hard. Because men tried to bury it, tried to keep it hidden until they could claim it for themselves. I found the maps, I carried them, and I carried this piece to prove it's real. Eli's chest tightened. Suddenly, the whispers, the threats, the men outside the church, all of it made sense. They hadn't cared about the marriage. They cared about what she carried. He reached out, touched the ore, felt its cold strength against his skin. It should have thrilled him, but instead, dread sank deeper into his gut. Silver draws men like blood draws wolves, he muttered. She nodded. That's why I needed a husband. Not for love, for law. For law, a woman alone could never claim it. But a wife tied to land, tied to a name, that changes everything. Eli stared at her. So that's all this is, a claim stake. Her eyes softened, just for a flicker. It's survival. The ground itself seemed to shiver beneath their feet, or maybe it was Eli's nerves, because just then the sound of hooves carried across the horizon. Riders. She snapped the satchel shut, eyes narrowing toward the dust cloud rising beyond the ridge. They've found me, she said. Soon they'll find us. Eli's hand fell to his revolver. For the first time in years he felt the old fire surge back into his bones. Losing the ranch had made him tired. This was worth standing for. 4 men crested the ridge, their faces shadowed under broad hats. Their horses were lathered, eyes wild from the hard ride. Eli recognized one, Jeb Holloway, a man who'd been circling Boone Ranch for years, waiting to snatch it once Eli went under. Well, Jeb called, voice slick as oil. Looks like Boone finally found himself some company. Shame she won't be staying long. The girl stepped forward, voice sharp as steel. This land's mine by law now, married and witnessed. You can't take it. Jeb smirked. Law don't mean much out here, sweetheart. Bullets speak louder. Eli's revolver cleared leather before Jeb could blink. Dust swirled, horses stamped, and for a heartbeat, nobody moved. You want her? Eli growled. You go through me, and you know damn well Boone men don't fall easy. The girl laid a hand on his arm, steadying him. Not stopping, not soft, just steady. You'll die for her, Jeb sneered. Eli's voice was low. Sure, I'll die for what's mine. When they rode off, the girl let out a breath she'd been holding. They'll be back, she said. Stronger, faster. We need to move. Move where? Eli asked. To the hills, she replied, where the seam runs deep. If we stake it before they return, the law has to honor it. Even bullets can't erase a claim once it's written down. Eli shook his head. That's suicide. 4 rifles against us, maybe more. She met his gaze. Then you better shoot straighter than that. By midday, they were saddled and riding hard. The satchel clinked at her side, the ore inside heavy with promise. Eli couldn't stop glancing at her. This stranger who had turned his world upside down in less than 2 days. Why me? He finally asked again. Why Boone Ranch? She didn't look back. Because you were the only man too broke to say no. It stung, But she wasn't wrong. That night, camped at the edge of the hills, Eli woke to the sound of her whispering. Not prayers. Name. He couldn't make them all out, but one chilled him to the bone, a name tied to blood feuds and old violence. She noticed him watching. Don't ask, she said flatly. The less you know, the longer you'll live. But Eli couldn't stop himself. You're not just running from men, are you? You're running from a past. She stared into the fire, jaw clenched. We all are. When dawn touched the hills, she led him to a cut in the rock. And there it was, streaks of silver so bright they looked like frozen lightning in stone. Eli staggered back. Lord Almighty. She placed his hand against the seam. Now do you see why they'll never stop? This ain't just fortune, it's power. Enough to build a town. Enough to start a war. Eli felt it then. The crushing weight of what she'd brought into his life. Riches beyond measure, but painted with blood before they'd even touched it. The sound of gunfire cracked the morning stillness. Bullets bit into the rock near Eli's head, sparks flying. Voices echoed through the hills. Jeb Holloway had returned, and he wasn't alone this time. Eli ducked, heart hammering, as the girl shoved the satchel into his hands. Now you understand, she hissed. We don't fight for silver, we fight to survive. And as the men closed in, Eli realized this wasn't just about land or fortune anymore. This was about whether either of them would live to see another dawn. The silver seam had barely caught the morning light when the first shot cracked through the hills. Rock splintered inches above Eli's head, chips stinging his cheek. He hit the ground hard, rolling into the wash as another round screamed past. Ruth didn't flinch. She slammed the satchel shut, shoved it at him, and barked. Move! Hooves thundered across the ridge. Jeb Holloway and his men had returned, double the number this time, rifles bristling, eyes set on killing. You think you can steal what's mine, Boone? Jeb roared. That silver belongs to Holloway's. Eli rose from cover, revolver steady. His voice was iron. Not today. The hillside turned into a battlefield. Dust, gun smoke and ricochets filled the air. Eli fired, dropped one rider from the saddle, then ducked as lead chewed through the boulder at his back. Ruth pulled him by the sleeve, dragging him into a cut where the newborn stream now rushed. They'll pin us if we stay, she shouted. Then where? Downhill, to the wash, to the town. Bullets peppered the rocks as they scrambled. Eli's lungs burned, but Ruth moved like she'd rehearsed this path her whole life. She slid into the wash, boots splashing in the cold current, then hauled Eli down beside her. For a breath, they crouched together in the shadows of the wash. Ruth pressed her palm into the flowing water, lifted it to Eli's face, and let the silver-specked droplets run down. This, she said, voice fierce, is what they fear. Water and ore together. They can't bury it anymore. Every man in town will see it. Every woman will whisper it. The law won't be able to look away. Eli stared at her. And they'll kill us before it spreads. Her eyes burned. Not if we make it first. They broke from the wash, horses waiting at the base. Eli swung into the saddle, Ruth leaping behind with the satchel. Shots rang out. One bullet grazed Eli's arm. Another punched into the saddle horn, splintering wood. His horse screamed but kept running. Jeb's riders poured after them, kicking up clouds of dust, shouts echoing off the hills. Eli leaned low, urging the gelding faster, every stride hammering the same thought into his skull. If we fall, we die. If we stop, we lose. Ruth clung to him, shouting directions, left through a ravine, right across a ridge. Each turn bought them seconds, nothing more. By the time they thundered into town, the sun was fully up. Shop doors creaked open. Roosters crowed. Children stopped wide-eyed in the street. Dust rolled in with them, and behind it, Jeb's men like a storm. Eli pulled up hard at the church. The preacher staggered onto the porch, still in his nightclothes, blinking at the chaos. You again? He sputtered. Ruth swung down, her dress torn, hair wild but her voice steady. We need you, now. A sworn statement of water and silver on Boone land. You've seen us married. You'll see this too. The preacher's eyes darted to Jeb's men pounding closer. His lips trembled. Child, this is madness. Madness or not, Ruth snapped. You'll stand before God for what you write today. Jeb's men burst into the street, rifles raised. The crowd gathered fast. Merchants' wives, ranch hands, all hungry for gossip and gold. Jeb dismounted, swaggering, his voice loud enough to shake windows. Sheriff, he bellowed, stop this farce. Boone's no miner. That woman's no wife. This is theft, plain and simple. The sheriff, drawn by the noise, stepped into view. A weary man, lines carved deep in his face, his star glinting weakly in the sun. Recorder's office ain't open yet, the sheriff said. Then you shut this down till it is, Jeb growled. Ruth stepped forward, voice cutting through like a whip. Or you do your duty now, before blood stains your street. The sheriff hesitated. The crowd leaned in. Eli strode into the church with Ruth, dragging the preacher behind. The ledger from their midnight vows still lay open on the pulpit, ink smudged but legible. Ruth slammed her hand on it. Write it, she demanded. Water on Boone land, silver exposed. Witnessed. The preacher trembled, pen hovering. Jeb stormed through the door, pistol drawn. You sign that paper, he snarled, and you sign your death. Eli's revolver was up in a heartbeat, barrel leveled at Jeb's chest. One of us dies anyway. Holloway. Question is, do you want it before the ink dries or after? The church went silent, but for the ragged breaths of men on both sides. The preacher's hand shook so badly he nearly snapped the nib. Ink spattered across the page, but he wrote. He scrawled the words, signed his name, and pushed the book toward Eli. Done, he whispered. Ruth seized the ledger, thrust it at Eli. Run it to the recorder, before he reopens the law for sale. Jeb lunged, fury twisting his face. The sheriff grabbed him, pulling him back. Guns flared, 2 shots, deafening in the small church. Splinters flew. A woman screamed outside. Eli didn't wait. He bolted through the side door, ledger clutched tight. Ruth at his heels. Outside, the street had turned into a storm. Half the town shouted for Boone, half for Holloway. Some smelled justice, others smelled blood. A bottle shattered against a wall. A stone whizzed past Eli's head. The recorder's office, Ruth shouted. They ran, shouldering through the press, the ledger like fire in Eli's hands. Behind them, Jeb bellowed, stop them. That claim's mine. The crowd surged. Some tried to grab Eli, others shoved them forward. Horses reared, dogs barked, fists swung. It wasn't just about silver anymore. It was about sides. They reached the recorder's door just as the bell for 8 o'clock tolled. Eli slammed the ledger onto the desk, voice raw from dust and fury. Boone Ranch, he gasped. Water and silver, witnessed and sworn. The recorder looked up, startled, then down at the ink-smudged page. He dipped his pen, hand poised. Behind Eli, the street roared with violence. Jeb's men shoved against the sheriff. The crowd split and screaming. Ruth pressed her palm to Eli's shoulder, grounding him. Sign it, Eli demanded. Before this town burns. The recorder touched pen to paper, and a shadow filled the doorway. Boots heavy, gun hand loose. A man neither Boone nor Holloway, but someone whose presence made the whole room hold its breath. The recorder froze, ink dripping onto the page. The sheriff's shout carried from outside, lost in the rising chaos. Eli turned, revolver half raised, eyes locking on the stranger in the doorway. Whoever this man was, he carried the kind of authority that could bury Boone's claim, or make it untouchable forever. And in that moment Eli Boone knew the final fight wasn't over silver, or land, or even survival. It was over who would decide the truth. The recorder's quill trembled above the affidavit, a bead of ink swelling at its tip, when the doorway darkened. Boots thudded, slow and steady. A coat swept the jam. The hat brim shadowed his eyes. And then came the voice, low as gravel rolling in a dry creek. Recorder. That paper signed yet. Marshall Whitlock. A name carried like a ghost in this county. The law didn't send him often, only when a whole town threatened to crack. He was the kind of man who spoke in small words and left big holes behind. Folks swore he'd shot 7, maybe more. Others said he buried twice as many with a sentence. The recorder stammered, "Not yet, Marshal. Whitlock's eyes cut the room in slices. Eli Boone dust-caked, sleeve torn with blood. Ruth dress ripped at the hem, steady hand flat on the ledge. Jeb Holloway, jaw twisted with rage, pistol hanging low, a sneer already loaded. Whitlock's tone was calm enough to make the floor creak. Looks like I walked in at the middle of something. Question is, who's lying? Outside, the street heaved like floodwater. Shouts, curses, the nervous whinny of horses. Everyone waiting to see if this was justice or a show. Eli stepped forward, his heart hammered, but his voice carried the weight of every year he'd fought to keep Boone Ranch alive. Marshal, this land is mine by deed. My father broke it. My kin's bones lie in it. This morning, water ran, silver showed, the preacher witnessed. The sheriff saw. All I'm asking is the law on what's already true. Ruth's words followed like steel striking flint. This land can feed families. That seam can build homes. Holloway wants it buried for himself. I won't let it. Whitlock's stare shifted to her. Won't let him. Or can't. Eli swallowed. Doesn't matter. I'll die on it if I have to. Ruth's eyes never blinked. So will I. For the first time the marshal's mouth twitched. Respect, maybe. Then Jeb broke it. They're liars. Marshal, it's a sham. No ring. No real marriage. No claim. Boone's grabbing what's mine. Whitlock turned his head slow as a noose tightening. His eyes fell to the pistol Jeb gripped. You carry iron into the recorder's office, Holloway. Jeb sneered. A man protects what's his. Whitlock's hand brushed his own revolver. So do I. The windows rattled with the fury outside. Half the town shouted Boone's name. Half screamed Holloway's. A pistol cracked, answered by glass breaking. The sheriff stumbled in, hat askew, sweat beading his forehead. Marshal, if you don't settle this now, we'll have bodies in the street before noon. Whitlock laid his palm on the ledger. The weight of it silenced even the crowd. Recorder, you write what's true. The nib scratched the paper, long and shaky. Jeb lunged forward. Over my dead. The marshal's revolver cleared leather like lightning. One shot. Flat. Final. Jeb's pistol flew from his hand, clattering across the floor. Blood sprayed his knuckles. He howled, staggering. That's number 8 if you count stupid, Whitlock said, calm as ever. You want to make it 9. The room froze. Outside, the mob gasped. The loudest man in the county humbled in front of his own. The sheriff found his voice. Boone claims any man says otherwise answers to the star. The recorder finished the affidavit in a scratch that wobbled like a drunk line. Whitlock took the pen, signed his name neat and sure. Then he slid the book to Eli. Yours now, Whitlock said. Guard it. Don't waste it. Eli stared at the ink. His name. Ruth's. The preacher's shaky mark. The marshal's iron flourish. It was more than land. It was survival, future, and justice nailed down in black lines. Ruth's hand brushed his, not soft, not tender, solid, steady. Jeb Holloway clutched his ruined hand, hate burning in his eyes. He tried to roar, but it came out thin. His cousins dragged him back, muttering. The mob outside began to dissolve, some still hungry for gold, others whispering Boone's name like a prayer. You'll regret this, Jeb spat, voice ragged. Whitlock didn't blink. Maybe, but you'll regret it first. And that was that. By sundown the town had quieted, but not settled. Saloons buzzed, gossip sharp as knives. Wives whispered over supper, children wide-eyed at stories of the church. Eli and Ruth rode back to Boone land. The newborn stream shimmered in twilight, stitching silver across the valley. The cattle lifted their heads, confused at the sound of running water. At the porch, Eli leaned against the post, watching the stream. Feels like a curse lifted. Ruth stepped beside him. Curses don't lift, they break. And breaking hurts. Inside they unrolled the oilskin survey. Charcoal marks. River lines. The Boone section boxed bold. Eli studied it, fingers tracing. Why me, Ruth? You could have chosen another man, another ranch. She met his eyes. Because you had nothing left but land. Desperate men fight hardest. And Boone Ranch, everyone thought it worthless. That gave us time. He nodded slow. And you? What were you running from? Her jaw tightened. Not running, taking back what was stolen. My father dug silver till his hands bled, died broke, buried without a stone. I swore I'd never let another man own the ground under my feet. Eli's chest ached. She hadn't just brought him fortune. She brought him her father's unfinished war. The knock came long after dark. 3 raps. Hard. Eli gripped his revolver. Ruth eased to the window. Shadows by the corral. A whisper, then another. "Jeb's men," she mouthed. The door shook under a shoulder. Another bottle shattered against the porch rail. Fire spilling. Eli fired through the jam. A man screamed. Ruth dragged water, smothered the flames. Boots circled. A knife scratched at the kitchen latch. Ruth yanked the door open, slammed the man's wrist against the frame. Knife dropping. Eli's barrel found his ribs. "You say Holloway," Eli growled, "and you say it fast." The man spat blood. Ruth dropped him cold with a headbutt. They dragged him to the pantry. The front door shuddered again. Shots ripped into siding. The ranch smelled of smoke and gunpowder. Eli's gut told him the fight wasn't over, just begun. Then a whistle cut through the dark. Short, shot, hark, authority in its bones. Boots thudded up the lane. A star caught moonlight. "Enough," the sheriff roared. "Marshal's orders. Any man left on Boone ground goes to jail." And behind him, Whitlock's voice rolled like thunder. "You heard him. Count ends at 9. Who wants it?" No one stepped forward. The shadows melted back into the dark. By dawn, Boone Ranch stood, scarred, blackened in spots, but standing. The stream ran clean and loud. Silver sparkled in the seam where Ruth had struck. Eli stood by the water, boots sunk in mud, and for the first time in years he felt land breathe under him. Ruth knelt beside the stream, cupped water to her lips. "You saved it," Eli said quietly. "No," she said. "We did." He turned, voice rough. "Folks'll say Boone married without a ring." For the first time, Ruth smiled, faint but real, and by dawn she made him rich. Now, if you'd been there you'd remember 2 things. The way silver veins lit the hills like fire at sunrise. And the way a black woman stood steady beside a broken rancher, turning his curse into fortune. Some say Eli Boone got lucky. Others say Ruth was the real strength, the real fortune. But luck or strength, one thing's certain. Without her, Boone Ranch would have died. Without him, she never could have claimed it. That's how history gets written. Not by the men who shout loudest, but by the ones who stand their ground when the whole world says they can't. And maybe that's worth more than silver ever was.